I have to bring you this today. No other choice. As you know, I'm going through God's Celestial Purpose here by John Essex. Well, I come across this today in the Unsearchable Riches, and this is actually good to understand before you go into Ephesians. Now, I'm going into Ephesians pretty deep and pretty high in spirit when it comes to that book. But figures of speech is so important to understand if you're going to correctly cut the word of truth. So this one here is called Figures of Speech. And it says, the title is Reasoning from Figures Wrecks Reason. So reasoning from figures will wreck reason. Juggling with figures of speech is one of the saddest and most serious sources of error among the saints. It is most illogical to use a figure as the premise of a syllogism, yet it is a common practice. It is responsible in a large degree for the confusion which exists, hence urgently demands a thorough investigation. If the Corinthians were figured as a female, 2 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 2, then we are assured they cannot belong to the body of Ephesians, which is male, Ephesians 4:13. If the Ephesians are a new creation, Ephesians 2:15, they cannot be the development of the minors among the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 13. For creation is not development. The fact that in Ephesians itself says such impossible contradictions exist. This should keep us from this method of reasoning. Human reasoning sucks. Think about that. Human reasoning is really stupidity when it comes to correctly cutting the word of truth. There's not only a new creation in this very epistle, but precisely as in Corinthians, the individual saints are spoken of as minors who should grow up into maturity. Ephesians 4:13 through 16. Not only is the figure of man used, Ephesians 4:13, but also a woman. For the ecclesia is subject to Christ as a wife to her husband, Ephesians 5:23 and 24. Besides, the Corinthians are emphatically a new creation. Long before Ephesians, if anyone was in Christ, there is a new creation. 2 Corinthians 5:17. And the Corinthians were given the hint that they would become a man. In maturity-wise, not male and female. I'm talking about a man in maturity-wise. 1 Corinthians 13:11, the same word as in Ephesians 4:13, when maturity comes. Were we to reason in this way within the boundaries of each epistle, we would tear it to tatters. And when we use it in Paul's epistles as a whole, we shatter them into shreds. Even should we apply it to the entire Bible, we could prove that Satan is Christ and vice versa, for both are called a lion. So there's the difference. Figures of speech are so important to understand, otherwise you're going to take everything literal, and then you're going to screw it all up. 1 Peter 5:8, unveiling 5:5. So there's the two differences right there. By all means, let us preserve the distinctions which enable us to make a straight cut in the word of truth. But let us not deduce these from figures of speech indiscriminately, arrayed against one another, without method or intelligence. We ourselves have been hindered so much in our search for the truth by this means, and have suffered so severely from its results, that we wish, affectionately yet passionately, to warn everyone against this subtle delusion. Figures of the saints found in Ephesians. We do not wish merely to destroy this false method, but to displace it with the truth. Perhaps the best way to do this will be to consider some figures of speech used of us in Ephesians, making this epistle our standard of comparison, because all seem to be agreed that it gives us the highest and latest revelation, and that's the book of Ephesians. We wish to show that in it we are not only mature men, but were, and perhaps are, minors, not only sons, but actual children. As to sex, we are not only male, but also female, so there's no distinction. We are not only a new creation, but a plant, rooted and grounded and growing. We are ambassadors of peace, yet clad in full armor, Ephesians 6. All of this is found in this brief epistle. Consistently applied, this method should explode into countless fragments. We are children, beloved children of God, and we, in relation to God's love for us, and our imitation of his love in our conduct, Ephesians 5:1, God is love, and God is light. So in all goodness and righteousness and truth, we are to walk as children of light. Ephesians 5:8 and 9. Let us not confuse this with sonship or maturity, for it is quite a different picture, far broader, and includes all who love God, or rather who are loved by him, as well as all who once were in darkness, yet now are light in the Lord. Nor do we lose this love relationship or this light position when we become sons and mature, for this is not literal. The bonds of relationship and love expressed by the term children remain indissoluble, even when we are mature, for the maturity is not literal and lies in another realm. In figure, we are both children and mature, and there is not the slightest contradiction. In Paul's previous epistles, we have this same figure, but always modified by its context. In fact, figures have no fixed meaning, like words, so the sense in one connection may be quite different from that in another. So in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 7 and 11, we have two occurrences close together, yet each has its own distinct message. Paul wished to express his gentleness toward the Thessalonians, and so he speaks of himself as a nurse, cherishing her own children. Later, he desires to speak of the consolation and comfort that he imparts to them. Then he changes from nurse to father. In both cases in Thessalonians are children, but first in relation to unselfish care of a mother, and then in regard to comforting consolation of a father. Here Paul is first a female, then a male in figures of speech. Surely no one will use this to prove that he was two different persons, or that he had a wife. Yet such reasoning is rampant in far more serious connections. In Romans, we first read that we are children of God. Here the point is our allotment. Relationship is the basis of poverty ownership today. A child has a right to the possessions of its father. Our title to an allotment with Christ rests on this figure. It does not involve the new birth or other figures not immediately connected with the allotment. Having this allotment, we are free, not slaves. We are not, in this view, the property of God, though we are slaves in another connection. Here we are free, and creation also will be free from the slavery of corruption and enjoy this liberty. Romans 8:16, 17, and 21. Let us not drag in other matters here, not even the love of Ephesians, for even an unlovable child has its rights, and by no means the care and comfort of Thessalonians. Nor let us reject this position because we are mature. Property belongs to minors, just as legally as to those of mature age. Children have just as good a title to the allotment as sons. In the Corinthian epistle, this is most primitive. This is the most primitive relationship to God enjoyed by the saints. Is not even mentioned. Some would have us think that Corinthians and Galatians would be full of children and Ephesians harbor only sons. Yet the children of God are not mentioned in these earlier epistles, but the figure of a son not only occurs, but it is emphasized in Galatians. In relationship to Paul, however, children are there, much as in Thessalonians, as his beloved children. Compare Ephesians 5:1, he admonishes them. 1 Corinthians 4:14. In fact, he goes on to call himself their father and begetter. In 2 Corinthians 6:13, he speaks to them as he would to children, because they have acted childishly. So be childlike, not childish. I hope you understand that. Childlike is different than childish. An adult can be childish, but to be childlike is spirit and is love, and that is God. That's purity. Be like children, but childlike in the children's sense, not childishly. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 14, he brings up the provision which parents are bound to make for their offspring. In Galatians 4:31, the liberty of children is again used as a point of a figure. We are not children of the maid, but of the free woman. Not only in Ephesians, but also in Philippians, the highest revelation we have in relation to our conduct and service is in the secret administration. We are viewed under this figure. We are to be blameless and artless, qualities associated and exhibited in childhood, rather than in a later period of life. So then, we are children of God, because children partake of the Father's allotment. Romans 8:16 through 21. When beloved, they imitate their father's conduct. Ephesians 4:1. And they are blameless and artless. Philippians chapter 2, verses 15. No matter how much we may be mature in other matters, let us not forfeit these basic and essential marks of true sainthood. Right there, that's beautiful. So if you understand figures of speech and you get what it's saying, what is a figure? What is literal? You got to understand both in order to get the scriptures of what it's bringing across, whether it's figure of speech or the other, which is literal. So, Enoch had a saying, literal if possible. And if it's not literal, then it's definitely figurative. As you can see in the book of the Unveiling, there's a lot of figurative, but there's also a lot of literal. But that's the book of the Unveiling. It's for the earth, for Israel, the time of trouble, time of Jacob's trouble. But that's good. If you really want to study out and understand Ephesians, this is my point here. Ephesians is important to understand figuratively and literally. So there you are. Have a good Saturday. This is a Saturday special, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday.